Harvard-trained researcher Shanti Feldhahn, who's also a Christian author, and she has done amazing research about marriage. She, in this particular study that we're going to present, she surveyed thousands of couples, not just Christian couples, just couples. And she anonymously asked them to report and independently report back to her on these surveys so that there was no pressure thinking, oh, I have to say this because my spouse is going to know what I said. It was anonymous and it was independent. And then out of all these surveys, she grouped them into those who said they were basically struggling in their marriage, those who were moderately happy in their marriage, those who were happy in their marriage, and then those who were highly happy in their marriages. And she decided to look at what were the common traits or habits of these couples who said they were highly happy in their marriages. And I thought, okay, this is something we can learn from, right? And so she had like 13 or 14 common traits that she found in these highly happy couples, but we're going to just focus on 8 of them tonight.
8 common traits for happy couples. The first one is they always assume the best about their spouse. By the way, this was the biggest, and probably one of the most important factors that led to spouses being happy.
So they assumed the best, always assumed the best. Secondly, they recognize the value of taking a break when conflict is getting heated. They recognize the value of taking a break when conflict is getting heated, but they make sure it gets resolved within a few days.
Number 3, they notice what their spouse is doing for them and work to bless them in return.
All right. Number 4, are you all tracking along so far? Haven't lost anyone? Number 4, they quickly stop a negative train of thought and replace it with a positive one in order to change their feelings. In order to change their feelings, they stop the negative train of thought.
Number 5, they don't long for something that is difficult or impossible for their spouse to deliver, but focus on being grateful for the ways their spouse can meet their needs.
All right. Number 6, they make sure they reconnect with their spouse by using a private signal that indicates we're okay after their feelings have been hurt or after conflict.
Number 7 would be they choose to be as kind and respectful to their spouse in private as they are toward their friends in public.
In other words, if you wouldn't be shrieking at your friends in public, they treat their spouse the same way in private. And number 8, now keep in mind, again, these were all sorts of couples. They weren't just Christian couples. They were just couples, thousands of couples in her survey. These highly happy couples, they tend to put God at the center of their marriage and focus on Him as their source of happiness and fulfillment. So there you go. Those are the 8 common traits, but now we're going to go back and really unpack them. So,
trait number 1, assume the best about their spouse.
Okay, so this is what her research found. She found that in struggling marriages, or just like moderately happy marriages, her spouses routinely, but subconsciously, assume that their spouse doesn't care for them. Did you catch that? In these struggling marriages, or the moderately happy ones, the hurt spouse who's wounded in a conflict, emotionally wounded, assumes, that's always a bad thing to do, right? Start assuming things. They assume routinely that their spouse doesn't care for them. The internal assumption was something like, he knew how that would make me feel, but he did it anyway. Like that's what the thinking is, that assumption pattern. But the research showed among highly happy couples, even when hurting spouses couldn't completely explain why their spouse did what they did, they stubbornly assumed their spouse cared about them and had no intention of hurting them to begin with. I love this. They stubbornly assumed that their spouse had no intention of hurting them, that their spouse cared for them. They just stubbornly decided to believe that. Their internal assumption sounded something like, she must not have known how that would make me feel, or she wouldn't have done it.
So this trait can be summed up like this. When highly happy couples, or spouses I should say, are legitimately hurt, they refuse to believe that their mate intended to hurt them. and they look for the most generous explanation instead. So they just turn it around and say, I know that he doesn't really mean to hurt me, or she doesn't mean to hurt me. Maybe it's because of the day that she's had. Maybe the kids were a little trying. Maybe work was a little bit challenging. You know, as men, sometimes we never ask how things went with them. We want them to ask us how our day went so we can unload. And how is this trait number one that we're talking about biblical? 1 Corinthians says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things.